Hey, I want to show you how I set up Ableton Live as basically the the rig for how I use and channel switch and what have you when I'm using modeling amps. I use S-Gear and bias, and I do all the switching within Ableton. So let's talk about what I'm doing here. Um, okay, first of all, these two tracks, I'm just recording the sound from the DAW, so let's not worry about that. You're not going to have those. We'll talk about this momentarily. This is basically how I quote unquote channel switch. Track one, this is what sees the input from my guitar. My guitar is plugged into Focusrite 18i20. I'll talk a little bit about that, but later. But this is the hardware input. Now, you see how the volume is down. It's because if the volume was up, we would actually hear the direct sound from the hardware input, and that's not what we want. On this track, I have bias effects, and I have a little pedal board set up, and I'm actually going to start stepping on some pedals on my MIDI pedal board that's in front of me. You can't see it, but it's in front of me. We'll talk about how to map those in a moment, but it's essentially a pedal board. I just have a boost and some, that's supposed to be a Klon, a TS8, whatever, right? Like I would do in the real world. So that signal is being now shuttled to tracks 2 and 3, which hold my S-Gear amps. So the only thing hearing bias are the S-Gear amps. We are not hearing that. And as you can see right here, it's asking you where you want audio from. And I'm saying, yes, I want it from pedals. And right here, this drop down, not pre-effects, post-effects, so post-bias, but essentially pre-fader. So the fader is inconsequential. It's hearing just the signal as it's put out by bias, and only these amps are hearing that. We are not hearing that. And it's set up for unity gain. So that I noticed that S-Gear, just like in the real world, takes signal at the front end and handles it much like a tube amp. So that's what I'm doing there. Finally, well, not finally, there's a lot more to talk about, but tracks 3 and 4 are MIDI tracks, and they contain MIDI clips, but they're not sending MIDI CC data. They're sending program change data. And as you can see, the output, I'm not getting input from anything. I'm not controlling it. These are controlling the amp channels, or the amp presets. So they're sending program change data, and this is saying, yes, MIDI 2, this is going to amp 1, and this is going to amp 2. So every time I fire off a scene, and in Ableton, horizontally across from here, the master, I'll hit a button that's programmed to fire it off. I'm firing off a scene, and it will fire off every clip in that scene. The only clips I have are these MIDI dummy clips. So they're activated, and they send that program change data immediately to the 2 instances of S-Gear. And as you can see, as I scroll through the scenes, and you can see them on the right, they'll light up, and the amps will change accordingly. Whoa. And we'll talk about that patch coming up, I guess. So that's that. Also, what you need to know is I'm not really running these in stereo. I mean, I am. But each amp that works in tandem with one another is being heard from each speaker in the house. And I can get my monitor mix anyway I need to. But I'm panning the IRs left and right to give it some depth. That being said, you need to know that you should check your amps always, even if you're just using one amp. Check it in mono, then check it in stereo. Make sure you're not getting any phase issues. I noticed that some amps on certain settings are out of phase in S-Gear with other amps at certain settings. So right here, if I took this off, you see how you have a drop in a certain volume? It's like the center drops out. Yeah. So there's a phase issue there. I also noticed that, is it on this channel? I noticed that, it's on this, okay, it's on this one. I noticed that impulse responses, the Celestion impulse responses to that of Ownhammer, or rather Ownhammer, puts out signal 1.46 milliseconds after, or slower than the the Celestion. So if you play through a Celestion IR, it's gonna come out of the speakers 1.46 about milliseconds sooner than the own hammer. And it's not really a difference that you're gonna feel or notice, but I do have to delay the Celestion speaker because here's the preset without the delay. You hear how some of the volume goes away, and you'll notice that the center sort of disappears as well. So check everything in mono, check everything in stereo, make sure your IRs are in phase, and you could even use this little button. Sometimes this doesn't work because it's not just a hard phase flip. 1.5 milliseconds wasn't just a hard phase flip. So check it all and make sure it all works with each other. So how I MIDI map the pedals, first of all, in Ableton, there's a little button here. Each plugin, you'll notice, has parameters. These are like Ableton parameters. I don't really know. But anyway, on each pedal, I have to right-click, go to MIDI automation, and set a parameter that coincides with the parameter in Ableton. This isn't necessarily something that you would do if you were using it standalone, but it is what happens in Ableton. And then I would go to MIDI, and it's really this simple in this program. Go to MIDI, click on a parameter you want to control, and you'll notice that, oh, let me get this out of here. Something highlight. These are already set to certain switches on my MIDI pedal board, but you would just, this isn't set to anything. I would just click on this. I'm going to click on a free switch on my pedal board, and it's now mapped to that. But of course, that doesn't do anything, so I'm going to get rid of it. And I would also come over here and click on, a scene. So this would say fire that scene off. And yeah, I have that mapped. Each one of these is mapped already. And it was just a matter of clicking on the function in Ableton, stepping on a switch, and now it is forever mapped to that switch. It's really just that easy. That being said, you have to make sure that you're using, I'm using a MIDI foot controller, but you have to make sure the switches on your MIDI foot controller are sending MIDI CC data and not program change data. So whereas the dummy clips are sending program change data, you need to use MIDI CC data. I have used, like I said, Bias and S-Gear as standalone programs. If I was going to change presets, then I would use program change data from my MIDI foot controller in that case. But in this case, I'm effectively changing quote unquote channels or presets via the functions in Ableton. And the only way to control the functions in Ableton for the most part are to use MIDI CC. So anyway, I'm using an AcTition MIDI foot controller, AcTition. It has 3 rows of 4 buttons, 12 buttons, and they're great. It's lightweight. It was only $150, and it does everything that I would need a $400 Ground Control Pro to do. So I highly recommend the AcTition, and it's USB, so it's easy to use. What else to say about this? Let's just go through the patches. This rig right here is set up. I was playing in like a classic funk dance top 40 band last week. They play a lot of like older funk and Bruno Mars and things like that. So all the sounds right now are geared towards that band. I have other live rigs that are geared towards other bands, but for the most part, most of these things work in every situation. And I knew the sound guy, so I knew that he was running in stereo. It's always a good idea to, if you want to run in stereo, contact the sound guy beforehand, ask them if they are running in stereo. Because you don't want to get to the gig and just start, oh man, I have to fix this and fix that, because then you're not going to know what it's going to sound like. So I knew that I was going to get a good monitor mix. I knew that the house was going to be stereo, and not a big deal. So the first thing I have going is just a basic clean. Oh yeah. Classic funk. Making the money. Yeah, I'm making the money. Making the money. That sound is the sound of making the money because that's the sound that's going to get you paid. That's pretty much, that does everything you needed to do. Most of the night in a party dance band, I'm going to be playing, you know, you're going to be playing those sounds anyway. So, and I really like the fact that when I switch pickups, I could really hear the change in the switch. So to me, it's not like when I hear most people on YouTube, no offense or anything, but it all sounds like a compressed, the same compressed sound. I want to hear the guitar and I want to hear the pickups, and I can do that with the settings I have in S-Gear. So that's cool. Now let me bring up the pedal board here again. I'm going to step on a boost. I have a boost mapped to a controller. And you'll see down here as well that this slider comes over. Now the boost is on. So if, you know, I need to take a solo for doing something, and or we're playing a dinner set, and you know, I could feign Joe Pass. No, I can get some of those jazz sounds and get by with some jazz. And if you know, we're doing like something bluesy, I can get by. I could take a solo, so that acts as my boost. It gives it a little body, so that's what I'm doing with that. So that's the clean channel. Then I have a jangly, overdriven channel. Let's get those S-Gear presets. Yeah, that's looking good. By the way, I'm sorry, but these are phenomenal. These are phenomenal, especially these two. I have a Fender Blues Deluxe reissue, and it nails this. It just does that thing. So I'm doing Tom Petty. And it's pretty touch sensitive, so you can tell when I'm digging in harder. When I'm digging in harder, it's giving me a little more grit. I don't know how it does it, but that's the way my tube amp works. I mean, it's not perfect. The tube amps are going to be even more responsive, but I mean, in terms of software, this is pretty much where it's at. Anyway, and then I have some sort of clon. And it does that. I have a TS9 too, actually, or a TS whatever. It's coming from Bias. It does the Stevie Ray Vaughan thing, and depending on the pickup, you know. I'm in a different territory. Let's see if I can do some Zeppelin on this sound. So that's sort of my jangle sound for doing some like stuff for doing like Google Dollars or something. Or Oasis. It handles all that stuff. I'm a little out of tune, but whatever. Then I have another channel. And this is the AZDC channel. It does that thing. And then finally, I have the ridiculous channel. Oh, listen to that hiss. Apparently it's the Jackal paired up with the Wayfarer. Ugh, I can't even control it. Oh, I forgot to tell you one other thing. Let's get this. I can't take this. The hiss. On the master channel, I have just a general EQ. I noticed that 2 to 3K about that is sort of spiky in that it hurts my ears. Every once in a while, I'll have an amp, especially a Fender style amp, in reality, that'll be really spiky here, and it's very shrill, and it hurts my ears and that of the audience. So I take a little bit out of there just in case I'm producing any of those unwanted sounds. I could have put a multi-band compressor on it, but I didn't feel like it. And I'm doing a little bit of a high-pass filter so I don't compete with the bass. There's that. But I also have an Ableton delay. And I have this mapped to, and I'll show you in the MIDI mappings. I have the toggle on-off mapped to a switch, and I have the global tempo mapped to a switch. So I can, when I turn this on, it's also going to affect my voice. My voice. There's a million of me. Oh, that's lovely. Let's turn that off. So if I'm turning on the Ridiculo channel, which is probably something that I'd use for your typical, that thing that people get paid to do. I usually have the delay on that because this is just way too, and the volume is really, really loud because that's just basically the switch that I hit when we're playing 80s stuff that I really need. Not only the crazy amounts of rock gain, but also a boost. So I put the delay on that. Too much. I can't even take it. I don't like doing that. I gotta be honest, I don't like that stuff. It's fun, but in order to play like that, I gotta have a band behind me. It's gotta be kind of in the moment when you're doing it. I'm not Tom Quayle, so if you came here expecting him, sorry. Anyway, so those are I guess that's it. Those are the sounds that I used this past week, at least. This is the architecture in Ableton. And that's what I'm using. Oh, one last thing. This is important. I learned this the hard way. As I said, I'm using a Focusrite 18i20 because I need a bunch of inputs. I also need a bunch of outputs. In Ableton, you can route things through different outputs. Because I'm using this for more than just what I'm showing you here, which I'm sure there'll be other videos. But in any case, what you need to know is you have to understand what type of output, hardware output, your audio interface has. So for instance, this 18i20 has 1/4-inch balanced outs. It's sort of odd, and here's why. I first used just 1/4-inch outs that were not balanced, in which case you're not actually getting the whole signal. And plugging that into a PA directly, there were phase issues and volume issues. So then I used those same unbalanced quarter-inch cables, and I got myself a DI box, and that would convert what I thought everything into a balanced signal into an XLR. Every XLR carries a balanced signal, but you cannot take an unbalanced signal if the source coming out wants to see from the back of your outputs is giving you already a balanced signal, but you're not taking it. You can't then turn it back into the balanced signal because you've already lost the signal to begin with. That makes no sense. Anyway, phase issues. So finally what I realized is I need a cable that's completely balanced from male to female, but the connections had to be the right type of connections. So the only way I can use this 18i20 is to have a balanced quarter-inch out of the back of it going to an XLR cable. And every XLR connector carries a balanced signal. So I'm all set. I can plug into any PA system. Not every, on a channel of a PA system, on a mixing console, not every quarter-inch in accepts balanced in. So I use an unbalanced cable once with one mixing console. That mixing console actually accepted the unbalanced signal in, and it was okay. It worked fine. The next console I plugged into, those quarter-inch cables did not accept balanced in. I'm complicating this. Anyway, make sure you have the right connections. If it's a balance, make it balanced. Just don't mess around with it. Balanced either way. Anyway, so that's it. I look forward to showing you, I guess, more of what I'm doing in the future, but that's basically the rig. And I'll put some links down to, look at that. I'll put some links down to my bands that I'm working with in the description. And I'll see you. I won't see you. It's the internet. Take care.